but Charles Clarke was Home Secretary at the time of the 7/7 bombings and is with me now. Good evening. Thanks very much for coming in. We'll come on to look more broadly at how we combat terrorism in a moment. But let's just deal first of all with Jeremy Corbyn returning to the fray tomorrow morning. You heard there the Labour candidate in Manchester saying that he finds it very difficult to imagine how there's going to be an adversarial approach. This is actually quite adversarial, but Jeremy Corbyn's view, he says, that the war on terror isn't working. Is he right?
I don't think he is right. I mean, I've not taken Jeremy's advice on security matters for some decades now, and I don't with his remarks tomorrow, as if they're correctly reported. He's simply wrong. The core attacks from 9/11 and beforehand have come from forces which are about trying to destroy the whole of our society. This is before the Iraq War, before the wars in Syria, and they're about eliminating the ability of young people to go to an event like they did in the Manchester Arena, eliminating programmes like this to create a society under the caliphate which really removes all our democracies. It's quite different from previous terrorist organisations.
In an excerpt from the speech he's going to make tomorrow, he says, "We will also change what we do abroad. Many experts, including professionals in our intelligence and security services, have pointed to the connection between wars our government has supported or fought in other countries and terrorism here at home." I mean, some people would suggest that's right. I suppose you might...
At one level, it's a trivial remark, because it's certainly true that there are networks. Before 7/7, people had travelled around the world. It may be that there's some link with what's been going on in Syria and the individual who's committed this awful atrocity in Manchester. But that's not the motive force. The motive force is about the destruction of all the core elements of our society. And that's not something which is about a foreign policy conflict, something in Syria, something in Iraq, whatever it might be. It's about a totally opposed vision of what society should be.
Well, of course, he has opposed foreign conflicts, which would suggest then that a Labour government would then not support, for example, intervention in Syria, would not support intervention in Libya.
Well, you'd have to ask him on that question. It's been a massive issue of discussion in the Labour Party, and much more widely, of course. And there's a whole set of issues about what are the right circumstances in which support should take place. But you've also got to acknowledge, Kirsty, in this difficult debate, that not getting involved has consequences just as much as getting involved.
Do you think then, given that what you hear he's going to be saying tomorrow, that he is prime ministerial material?
I've never thought he's prime ministerial material. I didn't support him as leader of the Labour Party. I shall be voting Labour in the election. I hope Labour does well, because I think we don't want a Theresa May government with a barren field in front of them. But I can't say with integrity that I believe that Jeremy Corbyn is prime ministerial material.
Well, moving on, and indeed moving back to the time of 7/7, and you were Home Secretary. Now, just before then, you had started to introduce a number of anti-terror measures, one of which was ID cards, which went all the way to royal assent. Then in 2010, Theresa May overturned that.
It was her first act.
Do you believe that had we had ID cards now, we would be in a different position or not?
You can't say that of any of the particular measures. You can't say if only that had been done, this Manchester bombing wouldn't have succeeded. But I do believe it's the job of government to create a climate which makes it more difficult for the terrorist organisations to work. ID cards are one of those things. A good control order regime, which Theresa May also abolished when she came in, is another of those things. A good community policing system with police and community support officers properly funded is another of those things. You've got to do all of these things, but you can't say, if only we'd had ID cards, for example, then this attack wouldn't have happened.
If we look at this particular, the Salman Abedi case, I mean, there seems to be some suggestion that security services over time have missed chances to actually home in on him. I mean, do we have to accept that that is the nature of our anti-terror policing, that some will get through the net?
That's the risk, and that's why we've got the security levels that we have at the moment being talked about. But you can't ignore the importance of resources for our security services, because they have to look at literally thousands of people who might be possible risks. And they have to make judgments, very difficult judgments, about where to prioritise. But the overall background is the resources situation.
Well, the resources situation, I know that Labour has said, of course, there have been police cuts. But if you take someone like Andy Burnham, speaking from a Manchester perspective, what he would say, and has said, is that actually it's disproportionate now about the police that are in London streets and the police that are in streets of other cities throughout the United Kingdom. also, I was wondering if you think that the style of policing, we need to move far more to intelligence-led policing.
Completely. The core is intelligence-led policing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our structure of 43 police forces in Britain is not well equipped to deal with that. We tried to change that and didn't succeed. You haven't got enough resources in places like Greater Manchester and other forces throughout the country. They tend to be too concentrated in the Met, and you need them right throughout the country to be able to see what's going on. But I'm not one of those who criticises MI5 or the security services in relation to this case. Obviously, we'll need to examine what exactly happened, why they took the decisions they did, and I'm certain that analysis is already going ahead. But the core issue is creating a climate in which we can keep our civil liberties most effectively.
Thank you very much, Charles Clarke.